Donald Trump walked through 250 years of precedent like it was a revolving door. Sitting directly across from Ilhan Omar to dismantle her entire career on live television, she stood in the House chamber and screamed, "You are a liar," right at the President of the United States. 60 million people watched. She thought she was brave. He thought she was guilty. One of them was right. This administration has called my people garbage, called me garbage, and now they drag me into this room to answer for the crime of being Somali in America, Ilhan Omar declared. She was standing at the witness table in the Senate hearing room, her finger pointing at the committee dais, shaking with the practiced fury of a woman who had turned outrage into a career. She wore a blazer over her hijab, and the gallery behind her was packed with CAIR representatives, holding signs demanding an end to the witch hunt. "I receive 300 death threats a week," she continued, holding up her phone for everyone to see. "They tell me to go back to Africa. They tell me they will put a bullet in my hijab, and the President of the United States encourages it every single day." She paused, letting the gallery's applause wash over her, then dropped her voice to reveal the crack, the vulnerability, the refugee story. She had given this speech 100 times, and it worked every single time. "I came to this country at 8 years old, after 4 years in a refugee camp. I didn't speak English. My family had nothing. We came to America because we were told it was the one place where a girl from a refugee camp could serve in Congress." She straightened up, steel replacing her tears. "I am the American dream, and I will not be intimidated by—" Suddenly, the door behind the dais opened. Secret Service agents entered. First 2, then 4, then 6. The gallery went silent. It was not just quiet, it was the heavy, physical silence of a room where something unprecedented is about to happen, and everyone can feel it before they can even see it. Donald Trump walked through the door and sat down at the committee table directly across from Ilhan Omar, just 6 feet away. A sitting president had never, not once in the history of the Republic, sat across from a member of Congress in an adversarial hearing. It had never happened, because it was never supposed to happen. Omar's face went through 3 distinct expressions in 2 seconds: surprise, fury, and fear. She buried the third one fast, but the C-SPAN cameras caught it. Trump did not adjust his microphone. He did not open a folder. He just looked at Omar the way a man looks at a parking ticket. "You called me a liar at the State of the Union," he said, his tone conversational, almost friendly. 60 million people heard it. Very dramatic, great television, so I figured, why not come down here and let you say it to my face? An aide placed a thick briefcase on the table beside him. Trump patted it once. "And then I'll show everybody who the real liar is. Let's go, Congresswoman. I've got a lot to show you." Trump opened the briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it up like a man showing a speeding ticket to a judge. $19 billion, he said. "That is how much has been stolen from American taxpayers in your state. Not my number. That is the U.S. Attorney's estimate. 19 billion with a B. From Minnesota. Your state, your district, your people." He set the paper down and looked directly at her. "You know what the GDP of Somalia is? About 8 billion. Your community stole more from American taxpayers than your entire homeland produces in a year. That is honestly kind of impressive. In a terrible way." A few nervous laughs rippled from the gallery. Trump did not smile. He was already reaching for the next document. "Feeding our future. $250 million stolen from a federal child nutrition program. Fake meal sites. Invoices for millions of meals that were never served to children who didn't exist. The money went to luxury cars, real estate, and overseas travel. 70 people charged. Over 90% of them, and this is from the U.S. Attorney's Office, not me, Over 90% are of Somali descent. He held up his hand before Omar could speak. Now, you are going to say the mastermind was Amy Bach, a white woman. I know you've said it 100 times, and you're right. She's the mastermind. She's going to prison. But here is what you don't say. He pulled out a printed, flagged, and date-stamped email. This is an email from your legislative aide to 3 Feeding Our Future site operators, dated the 12th of March 2022. Weeks before the Meals Act you co-sponsored was signed into law, he read aloud, "The Congresswoman's bill will expand emergency feeding eligibility significantly. Begin preparing additional site applications now. The window will open fast." He set the email down. Your office tipped them off before the law was even signed. Your aide was telling the fraudsters to get ready. You built the door. Your office told them when it would open, and they walked through it with wheelbarrows. Omar erupted, shouting, "I had no knowledge of that email. My staff." "Your staff works for you," Trump interrupted. "When my employees do something wrong, they say Trump told us to. When your employees tip off fraudsters, you say you didn't know." Interesting how that works. He pulled out another document showing campaign finance records. 7 individuals who were later indicted in Feeding Our Future cases donated to your campaign between 2019 and 2021. Total donations, $48,000. He fanned the donation records across the table like a poker hand. Abdiaziz Farah donated $5,000 in March 2020. Indicted for wire fraud in August 2022. Kamar Hassan donated $2,000 in November 2020. Indicted for money laundering in August 2022. Abdimajid Noor donated $3,000 in June 2021. Indicted for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He looked up. 7 donors, 7 indictments, all from the same fraud ring, all giving money to the same Congresswoman. That is not a coincidence, Congresswoman. That is a client list. Omar's lead attorney stood up immediately. My client returned every one of those donations proactively after the indictments. Trump spoke without even looking at the lawyer. Not before. Not when the fraud was happening. Not when the FBI was investigating. After. When the names were public. When the press was watching. When keeping the money would have been too obvious even for you. He looked back at Omar. You returned the money, and your spokesperson said, and I love this phrase, I really do, out of an abundance of caution. You know what that means in English? It means, oh crap, the FBI found out. In the back of the gallery, 2 Democratic aides stood up simultaneously, exchanged a worried look, and walked out together. One of them was already dialing her phone before she reached the door. Trump pulled out a printed list. But Feeding Our Future is just the big one. There is also child care fraud, $3.5 billion. Education fraud, $2.1 billion. Housing assistance fraud, $1.8 billion. Healthcare fraud, $800 million. All in Minnesota. All centered in the Somali community. All discovered after 2020. He added them up on his fingers slowly for the listeners. 3.5 plus 2.1 plus 1.8 plus 0.8 plus Feeding Our Futures, $250 million. That is over $8 billion just from the ones we have found so far. The U.S. Attorney says the real number could be double that. He set down the list. You have been in Congress since 2019, 7 years. Your district has generated more fraud per capita than any congressional district in American history. And your response every single time someone asks you about it is to call them a racist. He leaned forward. 19 billion isn't racist, Congresswoman. It is arithmetic, and the arithmetic says your district is the fraud capital of America. Omar's face was rigid as she argued, these are complex social service programs that were exploited during a pandemic. Fraud happens everywhere. Not like this, Trump interrupted. Not $19 billion worth. Not in one state. Not in one community. Not overseen by one congresswoman who wrote the legislation that made it possible. He tapped the printed email, and whose staff sent the invitations. He closed the first section and reached for the next. But the $19 billion is other people's fraud. Let's talk about yours. Trump pulled out a financial disclosure form and held it high. 2018. The year you entered Congress. Your financial disclosure shows you were basically broke. Negative net worth. You owed more than you owned. I get it. A lot of people start that way. I didn't, but a lot of people do. He pulled out another form. 2024. 6 years later. Household net worth between $6 million and $30 million on a salary of $174,000 a year. He looked across the committee. I am a billionaire. I know how money works. And I am telling you, you don't go from broke to $30 million on a congressional salary. You don't do it legally. Anyway, he pulled out FEC records. Let's start with Tim Minette, your boyfriend, then your husband. His consulting company, the E Street Group, received $2.78 million from your campaign, $2.78 million from the donations of working people who sent you $10, $20, because they believed in you. Trump paused and shook his head. I've been through 3 divorces. Very expensive. Beautiful women, very expensive divorces. But I paid for mine with my own money. You paid for your love life with campaign donations from people who make $12 an hour? He pulled out divorce records. Beth Minette, Tim's first wife, filed for divorce in 2019. In the filing, she said her husband told her he was having an affair with you. She said under oath that he told her, quote, "Don't worry about money. Ilhan's campaign is covering everything." He set down the divorce record and picked up a stack of receipts. And here is everything. Romantic dinners for 2 in Nice, France, charged to your campaign. Hotel suites in cities with no campaign events, your campaign. A couple's spa in Napa Valley, your campaign. 8 trips totaling $21,000, listed as travel expenses, with no names, no dates, no purposes. Just E Street Group, the company owned by the man you were sleeping with. Omar's lead attorney leaned forward quickly. The FEC reviewed these matters and found they couldn't prove intent. That's not the same as innocent, Trump shot back. That's the same as, we know you did it, but our lawyers say we can't nail you. I've dealt with a lot of investigations. I know the difference. He reached for the next section. But $2.78 million is the old money. Let's talk about the new money. The mystery money. He pulled out both financial disclosures side by side. 2023. Your husband's companies, a winery called East ITCA ESCTSEC, and a venture capital firm called Rose Lake Capital, are worth a combined $51,000. 1 year later, 2024, they are worth between $6 million and $30 million. He looked directly at the camera, because Trump always knew where the real audience was. 1,000 to 30 million in 1 year. That is a 588 times return. You know who gets 588 times returns? Nobody. Not me. Not Warren Buffett. Not anybody who isn't cheating. He pulled out a lawsuit filing. And speaking of cheating, Naeem Mohammed. Is Mr. Mohammed here today? A well-dressed, angry man in his 50s stood up in the gallery. Mr. Mohammed invested $300,000 in your husband's winery, Trump said. He was promised 200% returns in 18 months. He never got a dime. He says your husband used the money to buy a house, the house you live in. They stole my money. Muhammad shouted, his voice echoing. $300,000. My children's college fund. Tim Minot told me his wife in Congress would guarantee the business succeeded. Security immediately moved toward him, but Trump raised a hand. Let the man speak. He is the victim. She is the defendant. Muhammad continued, his voice breaking with emotion. He told me having a congresswoman as a partner meant government contracts. He used her name to get my money, and she lives in the house it bought. Thank you, Mr. Muhammad, Trump said calmly. Sit down. We'll make sure you get your day in court. He turned back to Omar. Your husband used your name, your position, and your title to defraud an investor. And you live in the house the fraud paid for. In real estate, that's called proceeds of crime. He pulled out another lawsuit. But Mr. Muhammad isn't the only victim. EST Ventures, another company connected to your husband and his partner William Haler, was sued by South Dakota cannabis companies for failing to deliver on fundraising commitments. The firm admitted to owing investors over $1 million. He set down both lawsuits side by side. Two companies, two fraud lawsuits. Same people, same pattern. Promise big returns, take the money, disappear. One time is a mistake. Two times is a business model. He pulled out a printed article. And who is William Haler, your husband's business partner? Let me tell you about Mr. Haler. He worked for Keith Ellison, the man whose congressional seat you inherited. He worked for the Democratic National Committee. He is a Democratic operative who went from politics to venture capital with your husband. Their first company together was E Street Group, the one your campaign paid $2.78 million. Then they started a winery, then a venture capital firm. Then both got sued for fraud. He looked up at the committee members. It's a family operation. A political operative meets a congresswoman's husband. They start a consulting firm. The congresswoman's campaign pays the consulting firm millions. Then they start other businesses using the congresswoman's name and position to attract investors. When the investors don't get paid, they sue. And through all of it, the congresswoman's net worth goes from 0 to 30 million. He turned his piercing gaze to Omar. You say you have no involvement in your husband's business, but you listed his company's income on your financial disclosure. You live in the house his investors' money bought. Your name was used to recruit investors, and your campaign was the first client that made all of it possible. Trump paused and shook his head slowly. I am a businessman, congresswoman. I've built buildings, hotels, golf courses, casinos. I've made money and I've lost money. But I have never used public office to funnel taxpayer-funded campaign donations to my spouse's company. That's not business. That's a racket. But Trump was far from done with the money. He was saving the most devastating point for last. Now, Congresswoman, I want to be very respectful about this next part, he said. And the way he said, respectful, made everyone in the room understand he was about to be anything but. Your faith, very important to you. You've told us many times. You wear the hijab. You observe Ramadan. You married your husband in an Islamic ceremony. Islam is your identity, your brand, your shield against criticism. He let the silence hang for a moment. Your husband owns a winery. He makes wine. He sells wine. He is being sued over wine. And in Islam, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm Presbyterian, alcohol is haram, forbidden, not a gray area, not a, well, maybe, flat out forbidden. He looked at her with pure disdain. You lecture America about respecting Islam every single day, and you profit from alcohol sales every single night. That is not faith, Congresswoman. That is a Halloween costume. You put it on when it's useful, and take it off when the money comes in." Omar exploded from her chair, screaming, "You are attacking my faith. You, a man who has never set foot in a mosque, who has called for banning Muslims from this country. You dare." "I am reading your financial disclosure," Trump said over her, yelling. "You listed the winery income, not me. You. If your God says alcohol is forbidden, and your tax return says you profit from it, that's between you and him. I'm just the messenger." The gallery erupted into absolute chaos. CARE representatives were shouting, the chairman was banging his gavel, and Omar's attorneys were physically pulling at her arms to seat her. Trump sat through the storm with the unshakable patience of a man who had survived 2 impeachments, 4 indictments, and an assassination attempt. When the room finally settled, he reached for the next section. "But the money is just the beginning, Congresswoman. Let's talk about who you married. And I don't mean Tim Minette." The hearing room transitioned from chaos to deafening silence in 3 seconds flat. Everyone knew what was coming. It had been whispered about for 7 years, investigated by journalists, vehemently denied by Omar, and dismissed as a right-wing conspiracy theory by her allies. And now, the President of the United States was about to say it out loud, on camera, with the evidence to back it up. "Ahmed Noor, Said Elmi," Trump said clearly, "your brother." Omar's response was immediate and fierce. "That is a debunked conspiracy theory promoted by racists." "And is it?" Trump asked smoothly. He pulled out a stack of documents so thick it landed on the table with an audible, heavy thud. "Because I have got about 200 pages here that say otherwise." An aide helped him organize them methodically, placing each exhibit in order. 2009. You legally married Ahmed Noor Said Elmi, a legal marriage certificate filed with the state of Minnesota. At the time, you were already living with Ahmed Hirsi, the father of your 2 children. So you had a cultural husband and a legal husband living at the exact same address. He held up a lease agreement. Same apartment. Columbia Heights, Minnesota. All 3 names on the utilities. There's nothing illegal about. Omar started to defend herself. "Hold on, I'm getting to the illegal part," Trump shot back. He held up a British educational record. "This is from a school in the United Kingdom where Mr. Elmi attended. Father's name listed Noor Said Elmi." He held up another faded document. "This is your family's refugee application from 1995. Your father's name, Noor Said Elmi." He looked at the stunned committee. Same father, same name, same family. Either it is the world's biggest coincidence, or he is her brother. And I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in documents. He pulled out printed screenshots. Social media, Mr. Elmi's Instagram, 2013. He refers to your daughter as his niece, not stepdaughter, which is what she would be if he were just your husband. Niece, because she's his niece, because he's your brother. He pulled out another piece of paper, the Daily Mail. Not my favorite paper, but they do good work sometimes. They asked you to take a DNA test in 2019? Simple test. Cheek swab. Takes 5 minutes. If Elmi is not your brother, the test proves it instantly. Case closed forever. He looked dead at Omar. You refused. I don't have to prove she tried to interrupt. You refused multiple times. Trump talked right over her. And every time you refused, you called the people asking racist. Funny how that works. Every time someone gets close to the truth, you pull out the racism card like a get-out-of-jail-free card. He then reached for the specific document he had been saving. But here is the one that matters. He held up a printed email, and the room went graveyard still. This is an email from Mr. Elmi to you, Lao Qianling Ishiyi, retrieved from government servers through a FOIA request. Date stamped. Authenticated. Your office was notified of its existence 3 days ago. Trump read it slowly, hammering every single word like a nail into a coffin. Thanks for helping me get papers, sister. I'll make sure to pay you back when I get to London. He set the email down. Sister, not wife. Sister. And your response, which is on the next page. He slowly turned the page. No need to pay back. Family helps family. Just be careful and delete these emails. The hearing room exploded. A Democratic committee member was heard saying, Jesus Christ, loud enough for every hot microphone in the room to capture it. Omar's lead attorney simply dropped his pen in defeat. A CARE representative in the gallery sat down so hard his chair scraped violently backward. Delete these emails. Trump repeated the phrase. She told her brother to delete the evidence. But government servers have long memories, Congresswoman. Longer than yours. Omar was physically shaking now. That email is fabricated. It's from the State Department's own servers, Trump stated calmly. Sue them if it's fake. I'll pay for the lawsuit myself. He wasn't done yet. But I have something even better. An aide connected an audio device to the hearing room speaker system. This is a recording from a Minneapolis community meeting in 2010. A community elder, a woman named Fadumo Hassan, 84 years old, respected in the Somali community for over 40 years, was recorded by another attendee. The fragile, accented voice of an elderly woman filled the cavernous room. We all knew. Everyone in the community knew Ilhan married her brother to get him papers. It was not a secret. She came to me and asked if I would be a witness at the ceremony. I said no. I told her it was haram. It was wrong before God and wrong before the law. She did it anyway. And now she sits in Congress and pretends it never happened. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was suffocating. You could feel it pressing against the walls. 84 years old, Trump said quietly. 40 years in your community. A woman who knew your family in Somalia before you came here. And she is willing to testify under oath. Omar's voice was barely an audible whisper. She's a liar. She's been paid by who? Me? Trump actually let out a dry laugh. I don't even know her. She contacted the committee on her own. She said she couldn't stay quiet anymore. Her words, not mine. He reached out and pulled the tax returns. And then there's the tax fraud, 2014 and 2015. You filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi, the man you were living with, while being legally married to Ahmed Elmi, your brother. Filing jointly with someone you're not married to is tax fraud. In Minnesota, the Campaign Finance Board fined you $3,500 plus a $500 penalty. He slapped the returns on the table. You committed immigration fraud by marrying your brother. You committed tax fraud by filing with a man you weren't married to. And when you got caught, you called everyone who questioned you a racist. He looked at her with an expression that was suspended somewhere between contempt and pity. The tears don't change the tax returns, Congresswoman. And the racism card doesn't change the email your brother wrote. Sister, you wrote, delete these emails. Those are your words, not mine. Trump reached for the very last section of his briefcase. It was the thickest one. But immigration fraud isn't even the worst part. Let's talk about September 11th, because that is when you showed America who you really are. Instantly, Trump's entire demeanor changed. The showman vanished. The comedian vanished. The nicknames vanished. What replaced them was a deadly serious version of Donald Trump that the hearing room had never seen before and would never see again. He was completely still. Completely somber, speaking without a trace of theatrical performance. Before I begin this section, he said, I want to acknowledge the families in the gallery. He turned around to face them. In the third row, a group of 15 people sat closely together. Some were elderly, some were middle-aged. All of them wore pins with photographs of young faces frozen in time, smiling in pictures taken months or weeks or days before September 11th, 2001. These are the families of 9/11 victims, Trump said. I invited them here today because what I am about to discuss involves the worst day in American history, and the people who lived through it deserve to be in the room when we talk about it. He turned back to Omar. The room was absolutely, profoundly silent. March 2019. A CARE fundraiser. CARE. The Council on American Islamic Relations, an organization founded by individuals connected to Hamas, according to FBI evidence presented in federal court during the Holy Land Foundation trial. You were the keynote speaker, he signaled, and a video played on every screen. It showed Omar at a podium, smiling broadly, speaking to a cheering crowd. CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Her recorded voice echoed. Trump paused the video. Some people did something. That is how you described the murder of 2,977 Americans. Not terrorists, some people. Not a coordinated attack that killed firefighters, police officers, paramedics, mothers, fathers, and children. Something. Like it was a traffic jam, like it was a scheduling conflict. He pulled out a printed post. But maybe that was just a bad choice of words. So let's look at your other words. He read from the paper. September 11th, 2013, the anniversary of the attacks. You wrote on a Somali language forum, Americans overreact to 9/11. More people die from medical errors every year. They use it as an excuse for their imperialism. He set it down disgustedly and picked up another. 2012. A tweet. Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Hypnotized. The Jews have hypnotized the world. That is not criticism of Israeli policy. That is an anti-Semitic trope from the Middle Ages. He produced another document. February 2019. It's all about the Benjamins, baby. American Jews buy Congress with money. Another anti-Semitic trope. Your own speaker, Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, forced you to apologize. 2 weeks later, you said members of Congress push for allegiance to a foreign country. Dual loyalty. Another trope. 3 anti-Semitic statements in 7 years, each one followed by an apology and then a repetition. He set down all 3 documents in a neat row. But those were public statements. Here is what you said in private. An aide connected another audio file. This is from a private fundraiser in Minneapolis. March 2019. Recorded by a donor who was disturbed by what she heard. Omar's voice filled the room once again. The Jewish members of Congress, they can't be trusted on anything related to the Middle East. They have divided loyalties. They put Israel first, America second. We need to watch them carefully and counter their influence. Several people in the gallery gasped out loud. 2 Jewish committee members looked as if they had been physically struck. Divided loyalties, Trump repeated solemnly. Watch them carefully, counter their influence. Those aren't policy disagreements. Those are the words used to justify pogroms in Russia, the Dreyfus Affair in France, and the Holocaust in Germany. He pulled out printed screenshots showing group chat messages recovered from a phone seized during an unrelated investigation. And here is the absolute worst one. This is from a WhatsApp group chat with political activists after your "some people did something" comment caused controversy. You wrote, he read slowly, letting every single word burn into the record. The American obsession with 9/11 is useful. Use their guilt against them. Every time they question us, bring up Islamophobia and discrimination after 9/11. Make them feel bad for their reaction, rather than the attack itself. The 9/11 families in the gallery reacted not with shouting, but with something far worse. The agonizing sound of people trying not to cry and failing. A man in his 60s stood up, his voice shaking with a raw grief that 2 decades had not diminished. My daughter was 23 years old. She worked on the 94th floor of the North Tower. She called me at 8:51 inches the morning. She said, "Daddy, something happened. I love you." That was the last time I heard her voice. His hands were trembling violently as he pointed at Omar. And this woman, sitting right there, she told people to use my daughter's death, to use my guilt as a political weapon. A woman 2 seats over stood up next. She was holding a photograph of a young man in a firefighter's uniform. My son was 26. Engine company 40. He went up the stairs while everyone else was coming down. They found his helmet on the 44th floor. They never found him. Her voice broke entirely, and she says, "Some people did something. My son wasn't something. He was a hero, and the people who killed him weren't some people. They were terrorists." A third person stood up. It was an elderly woman, small and white-haired, clutching a laminated photograph tightly to her chest. My husband worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, 68th floor. 658 of his colleagues died that morning. 658 from one single company. And this congresswoman writes, "Americans overreact to 9/11. The gallery was dissolving into tears. Reporters in the press section had stopped typing completely. 2 camera operators were wiping their eyes. A Capitol police officer standing guard by the door, a 20-year veteran who had worked security on September 12, 2001, was staring straight ahead. His jaw clenched, blinking much too fast. "Sir, ma'am," Trump said quietly and respectfully to the families, "I am sorry. Please sit down. She is going to answer for it. I promise you, she is going to answer for all of it." They sat. The woman with the firefighter's photograph held it against her chest, like a protective shield. Trump turned his entire focus back to Omar. All the showmanship was gone. All the comedy. All the nicknames. What was left was a man who had been in Manhattan on September 11th, who had watched the towers fall with his own eyes, who had known people in those buildings. "I was in New York that day," he said. "I watched the towers come down from 4 miles away. I sent my people to help, my construction workers, my equipment, for weeks. I know what Ground Zero smelled like. I know what it looked like when they found a shoe and couldn't find the person who wore it." His voice dropped to a fierce whisper. 2,977 people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, atheists, Americans. And you sit in the United States Congress. You collect a paycheck funded by American taxpayers. And you call it something that some people did. He pointed an accusatory finger directly at her. "Say the word right now into that microphone. Say Islamic terrorism. Say it." Omar sat absolutely frozen. "Say it," Trump repeated sharply. "You have been in Congress for 7 years. You have given 1,000 speeches. You have called America an oppressor. You have called Israel a terrorist state. You have called me every name in the book. But you have never, not once in 7 years, said the words Islamic terrorism. Not once." He waited. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds passed. Omar did not speak. "She can't say it," Trump announced to the committee. "She cannot say the words. The people who murdered nearly 3,000 Americans, She can't name what they were. She calls everyone else a terrorist. Israel, America, me. But the actual terrorists, the ones who flew planes into buildings, they're just some people. He turned his attention toward the gallery again. Imam Abdi Salam Adam of the Islamic Center of Minneapolis is here today. He asked to read a statement. The Imam, an elderly man in the gallery, stood up. His voice was calm, dignified, and carried the crushing weight of genuine moral authority. I have counseled Congresswoman Omar repeatedly about her rhetoric, the Imam said clearly. I have explained that her words bring shame upon all Muslim Americans who love this country. Her minimization of 9/11, her refusal to clearly condemn terrorism, her constant portrayal of Muslims as victims, even when Muslims commit violence, she damages our entire community. She does not represent Islam. She represents only her own hatred and ambition. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us to speak the truth, even when it is difficult. The truth is that what happened on September 11th was terrorism. It was committed by Muslims who betrayed our faith. And any Muslim who cannot say that is not protecting Islam, they are betraying it. The Imam sat back down. The moral weight of his words, a respected Muslim leader condemning a Muslim congresswoman on camera in a Senate hearing, was devastating in a way that no amount of political maneuvering could ever match. Trump looked back at Omar. Your own Imam, the spiritual leader of your own community. He says, you bring shame to Muslims. And he can say the word, you can't. Omar's eyes were wet, but the tears were different now. These were not the practiced tears of a politician playing the victim card. These were the tears of a woman watching the walls close in and realizing that the door she usually escaped through, the racism door, the Islamophobia door, the identity door, had been firmly locked from the outside. We're almost done, Congresswoman, Trump said, reaching for the final section. Just one more thing. Trump stood up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, impossible to ignore. Even when he was sitting, he commanded the room, standing in a hearing room where everyone else was seated. He blocked the light. He became the only thing in the room. Let me put this all together, he commanded, because people listening at home need to hear it in one shot. He counted on his fingers, one finger at a time, slowly, so the massive audience could follow. 1. Immigration fraud. You married your own brother to get him U.S. citizenship. You filed taxes with a man you weren't married to. The email says, Sister. Your own community elder confirms it. You refused a DNA test multiple times. Second finger. 2. Tax fraud. Joint returns with Hersey while legally married to Elmi. Fined by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board. Used campaign funds to pay your divorce lawyer, so donors paid to clean up your immigration scheme. Third finger. 3. Campaign finance fraud. $2.78 million to your boyfriend's company. Romantic trips funded by donors. 8 unitized travel expenses with no names and no dates. Fourth finger. 4. Enrichment through fraud. Net worth goes from 0 to 30 million in 6 years. Husband's companies explode in value from 51,000 to 30 million in 12 months. Husband sued for defrauding investors. You live in the house the fraud money bought. Fifth finger. 5. Enabling the largest welfare fraud in American history. Your office tipped off feeding our future operators before your bill was signed. 19 billion stolen from taxpayers. Donations from indicted fraudsters flowing to your campaign. Sixth finger. 6. Anti-Semitism. Israel has hypnotized the world. It's all about the Benjamins. Allegiance to a foreign country. Removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee, condemned by your own party leadership 3 times. Seventh finger. 7. Contempt for 9/11. Some people did something. private messages telling activists to use their guilt against them. Americans overreact. Your own imam says you bring shame to every Muslim in America. He put his hands down. 7. 7 categories of fraud, deception, hatred, and betrayal. From a woman who came to this country as a refugee and was given everything: citizenship, safety, education, opportunity, a seat in Congress, a salary paid by the American taxpayer. He looked directly into the C-SPAN camera lens. In 2019, at a rally in North Carolina, my supporters started a chant. They chanted, "Send her back." The media went crazy. Democrats went crazy. They said it was racist. They said it was un-American. They said it was the worst thing that had happened in American politics. He turned to Omar. And maybe it was wrong back then. Back when all we had were suspicions. Back when all we had were questions she wouldn't answer, and DNA tests she wouldn't take. His voice dropped to a lethal register. But that was before the email that says, "Sister," before the community elder who says, "Everyone knew," before 2.78 million in donor money flowing to her lover, before 51,000 becoming 30 million overnight, before the AIDS email tipping off the fraudsters, before 19 billion stolen from taxpayers, before use their guilt against them. He paused. It was the longest pause of the hearing. Send her back. My supporters said it because they felt it. They didn't have the evidence. Now they do. And now the question isn't whether the chant was offensive. The question is whether it was right. He turned to the committee chairman. "Mr. Chairman, based on the evidence presented today, I formally request that this committee refer the following matters to the Department of Justice immigration fraud, tax fraud, campaign finance fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. I further request that the Director of National Intelligence immediately revoke Representative Omar's security clearance, and I request that the House Ethics Committee open an emergency investigation into all matters discussed today." The chairman nodded grimly. The committee accepts the President's referrals. The Director of National Intelligence has been notified at that exact moment, and the timing was either sheer coincidence or brilliant choreography. The hearing room's speaker system crackled to life. "Attention! By order of the Director of National Intelligence, Representative Ilhan Omar's security clearance has been revoked, effective immediately. She is to surrender all classified materials and credentials to the Sergeant-at-Arms." Omar screamed. She didn't speak. She didn't shout. She screamed. "This is persecution. This is what you do to black Muslim women in America." This is two Capitol Police officers firmly entered the hearing room. "Representative Omar, we need to escort you to surrender your credentials." Omar's attorneys grabbed her arms. One was shouting about constitutional rights. The other was desperately trying to get her to stop talking. Omar pulled away from both of them. "I will not be silenced. I will not be removed. I am a United States Congresswoman." "Not for long," Trump said quietly. He wasn't even looking at her anymore. He was calmly packing his briefcase. He was done. An aide rushed to the committee table and handed Trump a phone. "President, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez just released a statement." Trump took the phone, read it, smiled slightly, and then read it aloud to the stunned room. "I am shocked and dismayed by the evidence presented today about Representative Omar. While I have defended her right to criticize policy, I cannot and will not defend fraud, corruption, or anti-Semitism. She has betrayed the progressive movement and must resign immediately." Trump set the phone down. AOC, even AOC. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says you've gone too far, and believe me, her bar for too far is very, very high, you know it's over. Another phone buzzed. Congresswoman Jayapal, heartbroken, cannot defend the indefensible. Another buzz. Senator Sanders, anti-Semitism has no place in our movement. Another. Speaker Emerita Pelosi, no member of Congress is above accountability. One by one, the dominoes fell. Each statement read aloud was another nail in the coffin. The woman who had walked into this room as a progressive icon was watching her entire political coalition abandon her in real time. On live television, with 60 million people watching, Omar was led toward the door by Capitol Police. She was still shouting about persecution, about racism, about Islamophobia. They were the same words she had used for 7 years. The words that had always worked before. The shield that had always protected her. But the shield was irrevocably broken. The emails had broken it. The recordings had broken it. The testimony had broken it. And now her own allies, the squad, the progressives, the party leadership, had broken it too. At the door, she turned back one last time. Her face was streaked with desperate tears. Her hijab had shifted, and her voice was raw. "This isn't over," she screamed. "I'll fight this. It's over," Trump said, without looking up from snapping his briefcase shut. "You're done, Congresswoman. You got here by fraud, and you're leaving by fraud. The only question is which federal court you end up in first." The heavy oak doors closed behind her. The hearing room began to empty chaotically. Reporters sprinted for the exits. Phones rang, buzzed, and vibrated endlessly. The 9/11 families quietly held each other. The K Street lobbyists were already calculating the new political landscape. Trump picked up his briefcase, stood, buttoned his jacket, nodded once to the 9/11 families in profound respect, and then walked out the exact same door he had walked in through, surrounded by his Secret Service detail. He left behind a completely destroyed career, a towering stack of undeniable evidence, and a room full of people who had just witnessed something that had never happened before and would never happen again. The hearing ended at 4:22 p.m. Eastern Time. By 4:30, the clip of Trump demanding, "Say the word, say Islamic terrorism," followed by Omar's 10 agonizing seconds of silence, had been viewed 19 million times. By 5:00, it had crossed 40 million views. By midnight, it was the most watched congressional hearing clip in American history, surpassing the Watergate hearings, the Kavanaugh hearings, and the January 6th committee combined. The second clip, the 9/11 father saying, "She told people to use my daughter's death," spread differently. It didn't go viral through political accounts, it went through family accounts, veteran accounts, firefighter accounts, and police accounts. It was shared by people who never shared political content, accompanied by captions that said absolutely nothing, except a single date, September 11th, 2001. Fox News ran wall-to-wall coverage for 72 hours straight. Their lower third chyron blared. Exposed Trump dismantles Omar in historic confrontation. CNN, after 4 hours of agonized panel discussion, settled on unprecedented hearing raises serious questions about Representative Omar. MSNBC led with Omar allies call for resignation after devastating evidence presentation. The legal machinery moved with a speed that shocked Washington. The Department of Justice confirmed within hours that it would review all materials presented and take appropriate investigative action. The IRS Criminal Division aggressively reopened its file on Omar's joint tax returns. The FBI expanded its existing inquiry into the Feeding Our Future connections. The House Ethics Committee announced an emergency, expedited investigation, but in Minneapolis, the political earthquake hit hardest. The Minnesota Democratic Farmer-Labor Party released a statement at 9:00 p.m. calling for Omar's immediate resignation. It was the first time in the party's history it had called for the resignation of a sitting member. The statement was completely unanimous. Not a single DFL official dissented. Outside Omar's Minneapolis office, a protest materialized within hours. But it wasn't the usual protest. It wasn't right-wing activists or Trump supporters. It was members of the Somali American community. They held signs that read in bold letters, "She does not represent us," and "Fraud is not our culture." Imam Abdi Salam Adam led public prayers for truth and accountability. A young Somali American woman, with tears streaming down her face, told a local news camera, "I was so proud when she was elected. I thought she was proof that someone like us could make it in America. Now I'm ashamed. She made us all look like criminals." The squad's implosion was total. AOC's resignation call was followed within hours by Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, and Jamal Bowman. Even progressive organizations that had fiercely defended Omar through every previous controversy released carefully worded statements that all contained the exact same phrase, "cannot defend the indefensible." The most devastating blow came from within the Muslim American political community. Congressman Andre Carson of Indiana, the first Muslim member of Congress to formally call for Omar's resignation, released a statement that was painful in its deep sincerity. "As a proud Muslim American, I am heartbroken by today's revelations. Representative Omar has damaged our community's reputation and undermined our efforts to combat real Islamophobia. Her actions do not represent Islam or Muslim Americans. She must resign." By Jashinch 0 p.m. Don Samuels, the man who had nearly defeated Omar in the previous primary, announced his candidacy for her seat in a video recorded from his living room in Minneapolis. "This seat belongs to the people of the 5th District," he said, "not to a fraud. I'm running to restore integrity, honesty, and trust. The people of Minneapolis deserve better. The Somali community deserves better. America deserves better." The legal machinery accelerated overnight. A federal magistrate signed a warrant authorizing FBI agents to formally search Omar's congressional office, only the third time in American history that a sitting member's office had been raided. Tim Mynett's attorneys had been served with expanded, sweeping subpoenas covering all business records for the past 5 years. The State Department referred the immigration fraud evidence to the appropriate division for a thorough review of Omar's naturalization status, and the IRS Criminal Division formally announced it was reopening its investigation into the fraudulent joint tax returns from 2014 and 2015. Omar's legal team, which had desperately grown from 2 attorneys to 7 in the short space of 6 hours, released a statement at midnight. They called the hearing an unconstitutional abuse of presidential power and vowed to fight these politically motivated charges in every available forum. The statement was 12 paragraphs long. It used the word racist 9 times. It mentioned Islamophobia 6 times. It did not address the email from Elmi. It did not address the community elder's sworn testimony. It did not address the WhatsApp messages. It did not explain how her household net worth went from $51,000 to $30 million in 12 months. The statement changed absolutely nothing. The phrase, "send her back," trended worldwide for 72 consecutive hours. But the conversation around it had fundamentally changed. It was no longer just a rally chant, it was a serious legal question. And for the first time, people who had violently condemned it in 2019 were acknowledging, reluctantly and uncomfortably, that the evidence presented demanded an answer. Cable news panels that had spent 7 years reflexively defending Omar against the chant were now struggling with a completely new reality. On CNN, a visibly uncomfortable analyst sighed and said, "Look, I still think the chant was wrong in 2019. But the evidence presented today, the email, the elder testimony, The financial disclosures. Those aren't chance. Those are facts. And facts require a very different conversation. His co-panelist, a progressive commentator who had previously called the chant the worst moment in modern American politics, sat in dead silence for 4 seconds before quietly saying, "I need to see more evidence before I change my position." But her face clearly said she had already seen enough. Donald Trump boarded Air Force One at Joint Base Andrews at 6:45 p.m. The plane was in the air by 7:00. He sat in the president's office at the front of the plane, a Diet Coke in hand, with 3 television screens showing 3 different networks, all covering the hearing. An aide knocked gently on the door. "Sir, the ratings are in." Trump looked up. "How'd we do?" 4.8 million live on C-SPAN. 63 million across all platforms in the first 6 hours. It is the most watched hearing in American history. Trump nodded and took a sip of his soda. "Bigger than Watergate." The aide confirmed. "Bigger than Watergate." Trump smiled, the satisfied smile of a man who had just done exactly what he came to do, and knew it. "Call Hannity. Tell him I'll do 10 minutes tonight. Only 10. Let the evidence do the talking." He paused, reconsidering. "Actually, make it 15. I've got good material." He picked up his phone and began to post on Truth Social, "Classic Trump," all caps where it counted. "Today we exposed the most corrupt member of Congress in American history. Immigration fraud, tax fraud, campaign fraud, 19 billion stolen from taxpayers. And she called me a liar. The evidence speaks for itself. The American people see the truth. Send her back to court. Make America great again." He set the phone down and looked out the thick window. 37,000 feet below, the country was unrolling beneath him in the fading light. Farms, highways, small towns, big cities, all of it connected by the fundamental idea that the rules applied to everyone. It was an idea that had taken a severe beating in recent years, but an idea that had maybe gotten a little stronger today. In Minneapolis, in a small apartment in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, a woman named Hale Lima sat alone at her kitchen table. It was the exact same kitchen table where, months ago, she had sat reading Ilhan Omar's financial disclosures and feeling the very first painful crack of disappointment. On the refrigerator behind her, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of Minnesota, was a photograph from 2018. Hale Lima and 3 friends at Omar's first campaign victory party, holding signs, smiling brightly, crying with pure joy. A Somali woman in Congress, the first one ever. It had felt like the glorious culmination of every sacrifice. The camps, the ocean crossing, the grueling years of learning a new language in a new country. It had felt like ultimate proof that the difficult journey was worth it. Hale Lima stood up slowly. She walked over to the refrigerator. She looked at the photograph for a very long time. She remembered that incredible night. The loud music, the happy crying, the undeniable feeling that anything was possible. Then, she pulled the photo off the refrigerator. She didn't fold it carefully and put it in a drawer, the way she might have done before. She simply dropped it in the trash can under the sink, and she tied the plastic bag shut. She was done. In New York, in a small apartment in Tribeca, Robert Callahan, the man who had stood in the gallery and shouted about his daughter, sat quietly in a chair by the window. He was holding a framed photograph, his daughter, Emily, 23 years old, taken just 2 weeks before September 11th at a family barbecue in New Jersey. She was laughing brightly at something her brother had said. She was always laughing. For 25 years, Robert had carried an impossible weight. It wasn't just the grief. Everyone who loses a child carries grief. It was the agonizing weight of watching people minimize what had happened. Politicians who used the painful anniversary for cheap photo ops. Pundits who callously said America overreacted. And a congresswoman who had the audacity to call it something that some people did. Today, someone had finally looked at that congresswoman and demanded, "Say the word." And she couldn't. Robert set the photograph on the small table beside his chair. He didn't cry. He had cried enough for 25 years. What he felt tonight was profoundly different. Lighter. It wasn't happiness. Nothing about this tragedy was happy, but it was something adjacent to it. It was the feeling of a massive weight finally shifting, a heavy door opening, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had finally said out loud what he had been screaming inside his chest since September 12th, 2001. His phone rang loudly. It was his son. "Dad, I saw you on TV. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Robert said softly. And for the very first time in a very long time, it was entirely true. In a firehouse in Lower Manhattan, Engine Company 10, located directly across from where the South Tower once stood, a crew of firefighters watched the hearing replay on a television bolted firmly to the wall of the common room. They watched in absolute silence. These were men and women who drove past Ground Zero every single shift, who knew the names etched on the memorial by heart, who had buried colleagues, friends, and brothers, and never really talked about it because talking about it didn't bring them back. When the television clip reached the 9/11 father's testimony, she told people to use my daughter's death. The captain stood up. He was a 30-year veteran who had been a probationary firefighter on September 11th and had spent 3 grueling months digging through the toxic rubble. He walked silently out of the room. He went down to the apparatus floor, stood next to the massive fire engine, put his hand flat against the cold side of the truck, and just breathed. He breathed deeply for 5 full minutes. When he finally came back upstairs, nobody asked if he was okay. They all knew. They had all been breathing like that for 25 years. In a military base at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, formerly known as Fort Bragg, a young Somali-American soldier named Abdullahi Hassan sat in the barracks day room. He was watching the hearing on his phone with his earbuds tightly in. He had enlisted at 18. He was 22 now, and he had already deployed once to the Horn of Africa. He loved America. He loved the army. He loved the flag he had sworn a sacred oath to defend. He had also, once, loved Ilhan Omar. She had been the living proof that a Somali kid could be anything in America. His mother had cried tears of joy when Omar was elected. His grandmother had prayed in thanks. Now, he stared at the screen, reading the email. "Thanks for helping me get papers, sister." And he felt something massive collapse inside his chest. It wasn't his faith in America. It was his faith in the person who was supposed to represent it. He slowly took out his earbuds, closed the video app, and looked up at the American flag hanging proudly on the day room wall. He was still a soldier. He was still Somali. He was still American. None of those fundamental things had changed. Only the person he had believed in had changed. He got up and went back to his bunk. He had physical training at 0500 hours. The United States Army didn't stop for congressional hearings. And on Air Force One, 37,000 feet above America, Donald Trump turned off the television, finished his Diet Coke, and closed his eyes. He wasn't sleeping. He was thinking deeply about a hearing room where a sitting congresswoman couldn't bring herself to say the word terrorism. He thought about a respected community elder who bravely stated, "We all knew." He thought about a damning email that simply said, "Sister." He thought about $19 billion that had completely disappeared into the pockets of people who had come to America and treated it like a crime scene. He thought about his loyal supporters in North Carolina 7 years ago passionately chanting 3 words that had followed him ever since. 3 words the media called hateful. 3 words the Democrats called racist. 3 words that, after today, sounded far less like a controversial chant and much more like a fulfilled prophecy. The plane flew onward through the darkening night sky, carrying the president safely home to Florida, while far below, in courtrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms all across America, the heavy evidence settled in, slow, heavy, and totally irreversible. They chanted, "Send her back." In 2019, the media relentlessly called it hatred. The Democrats furiously called it racism. She loudly called it persecution. But in a quiet hearing room in Washington, with deleted emails shining on the screen, brave witnesses sitting on the stand, and the overwhelming evidence stacked high enough to see from the cheap seats, America finally understood what the chant really meant. It was never about where she came from. It was entirely about what she did after she got there.